Listen carefully. The most dangerous people in any room are not the ones who speak the loudest. They're the ones who say nothing at all. True power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need validation, applause, or recognition. It exists in the space between words, in the pause before action, in the silence that makes others uncomfortable. When you master silent power, you become the gravitational center of every interaction without uttering a single word. The world belongs to those who understand this truth. Words are cheap, anyone can talk, but silence, strategic silence, that's a weapon only the disciplined can wield. When you speak, you reveal your position. When you remain silent, you force others to reveal theirs. This is the first law of psychological warfare. The one who speaks first loses leverage. The one who explains first shows weakness. The one who fills every silence with noise has already surrendered control. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He knew that the prince who governs through quiet observation holds more power than the one who rules through constant proclamation. Silence creates mystery, and mystery breeds respect. When people can't read you, they begin to fear disappointing you. When they can't predict you, they start adjusting their behavior to match what they think you want. That's influence without effort. That's control without conflict. You see, most people are terrified of silence. They fill every pause with meaningless chatter because emptiness makes them confront their own insecurity. But you're going to be different. You're going to learn to sit in that discomfort and watch others drown in it. Every awkward pause becomes your advantage. Every moment they rush to fill the silence is a moment they expose their desperation for your approval. Think about the people who intimidate you most. I guarantee it's not because of what they say. It's because of what they don't say. It's the way they look at you, measuring, calculating, deciding whether you're worth their time. That look, that pause, that deliberate withholding of reaction, that's what makes your heart race. That's what makes you second-guess every word that comes out of your mouth. The psychology behind this is simple but profound. Humans are social creatures programmed to seek validation and avoid rejection. When someone withholds their response, it triggers our deepest survival instincts. We start wondering if we've said something wrong, if we've been judged, if we're about to be abandoned. The silent person becomes the judge, and everyone else becomes the defendant, scrambling to prove their worth. This is your first lesson in silent power. Learn to be comfortable in the spaces where others feel uncomfortable. When someone asks you a question, don't rush to answer. Let the question hang in the air for a moment. Watch their face change. Notice how they start to fidget, how they begin to elaborate on their question, how they reveal more information than they intended. Your silence just extracted intelligence without you lifting a finger. But silence isn't just about withholding words. It's about controlling the entire rhythm of interaction. Your body language speaks volumes when your mouth stays closed. A slight raise of an eyebrow can communicate more skepticism than a paragraph of criticism. A slow nod can show more approval than enthusiastic praise. A steady gaze can demonstrate more interest than a dozen questions. The master of silent power understands that presence is everything. When you walk into a room, you should command attention not through noise, but through energy. Your posture should be straight but relaxed. Your movements should be deliberate but unhurried. Your eyes should be observant but not searching. You become a fixed point in a world of chaos, and chaos naturally orbits around stability. Here's what most people don't understand about power dynamics. The person who talks the most is rarely the person in charge. Real authority doesn't need to justify itself. It doesn't need to convince or persuade or explain. It simply exists, and others adjust accordingly. When you stop trying to prove your intelligence through words, people start assuming your intelligence through your restraint. Watch how this plays out in any meeting, any social gathering, any negotiation. The amateur feels compelled to share every thought, to contribute to every conversation, to make sure everyone knows how much they know. The professional speaks only when their words will change the outcome. The master speaks so rarely that when they do, everyone stops to listen. This is the paradox of silent power. The less you say, the more weight your words carry. When you finally do speak, people lean in. They pay attention. They remember. Your scarcity creates value. Your restraint builds anticipation. Your silence makes your eventual words feel like a gift rather than an obligation. But let me be clear about something. Silent power is not passive power. You're not sitting quietly because you're afraid or because you don't know what to say. You're choosing silence as a strategic tool. There's a massive difference between being quiet because you're weak and being quiet because you're calculating. The weak stay silent to avoid conflict. The strong stay silent to control it. The truly powerful person is always gathering information. While others are performing, you're observing. While they're talking, you're learning about their insecurities, their motivations, their pressure points. Every word they speak in the silence you create is intelligence you can use later. They think they're filling an awkward pause. You know they're giving you ammunition. This brings us to the concept of emotional labor. Most people exhaust themselves trying to manage everyone else's feelings. They feel responsible for keeping conversations flowing, for making others comfortable, for ensuring everyone feels included and validated. This is a trap that will drain your energy and diminish your power. When you take responsibility for other people's emotional states, you give them control over your behavior. The master of silent power refuses this burden. You are not responsible for making others comfortable with your silence. You are not obligated to fill pauses that make them nervous. You are not required to explain yourself to people who haven't earned an explanation. Your comfort with silence is not a problem to be solved. It's a strength to be leveraged. Here's where it gets interesting. When you consistently refuse to take on emotional labor that isn't yours, something fascinating happens. People start working harder to earn your attention. They begin to value your responses more highly because they're not guaranteed. They start treating your time and energy as the precious resources they actually are. Think of silence as a form of scarcity marketing for your personal brand. When something is abundant, it loses value. When something is rare, it becomes precious. Your words, your approval, your emotional investment, these should be rare commodities that people have to earn, not free resources you distribute to anyone who asks. This doesn't mean you become cold or cruel. It means you become selective. You choose carefully where to invest your energy and with whom to share your thoughts. You reserve your enthusiasm for situations that deserve it and your concern for people who have proven worthy of it. This selectivity doesn't make you less human. It makes you more powerful. The ancient strategists understood this principle intimately. They knew that the ruler who is always available becomes common. The advisor who always has an opinion becomes noise. The ally who always agrees becomes irrelevant. But the person who speaks rarely, who chooses their moments carefully, who makes others work for their attention, that person becomes indispensable. Now let's talk about the physical aspects of silent power. Your body is constantly communicating, even when your mouth is closed. Every gesture, every expression, every shift in posture is sending signals about your internal state. The master of silent power controls these signals as carefully as they control their words. Your breathing should be deep and steady. Shallow, rapid breathing signals anxiety and weakness. Controlled breathing signals composure and strength. When others are speaking rapidly or emotionally, your calm, measured breathing becomes an anchor point in the conversation. It subtly communicates that whatever is agitating them is not agitating you. Your eyes are perhaps your most powerful tool. They should be attentive but not eager, interested but not desperate. Learn to maintain eye contact without staring, to look away without seeming dismissive. Your gaze should feel like a spotlight, something people want to stay in but know they have to earn. Your hands should be still and relaxed. Fidgeting, tapping, or excessive gesturing betrays nervousness. Keep your hands visible but inactive. When you do move them, make it deliberate and purposeful. Every gesture should have intention behind it. Your posture should be upright but not rigid. You want to appear alert and engaged, but not tense or defensive. Think of yourself as a predator at rest, relaxed, but ready to spring into action if necessary. This creates a subtle sense of potential energy that others can feel even if they can't name it. The positioning of your body in space also matters. Don't rush to fill empty seats or squeeze into crowded areas. Take up the space you deserve. Move with purpose rather than hurry. When you enter a room, don't scan frantically for familiar faces or rush to join existing conversations. Survey the room calmly, choose your position strategically, and let others come to you. Here's a crucial point about silent power that many people misunderstand. It's not about being antisocial or refusing to engage with others. It's about engaging on your terms rather than theirs. When you do choose to speak, when you do decide to join a conversation, when you do offer your opinion, it should feel like a conscious choice rather than a reflexive response. This selective engagement makes every interaction more meaningful. People learn that when you're participating, it's because you've decided the situation is worth your attention. This makes them value your presence more highly and work harder to keep your interest. The timing of your engagement becomes a powerful tool. Learn to recognize the moments when your input will have maximum impact. Don't waste your words on casual chatter or meaningless debates. Save them for the moments when they can shift the entire dynamic of a situation. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up and say nothing. Your presence alone can change the energy of a room. People modify their behavior when they know they're being observed by someone they can't quite figure out. They become more careful with their words, more thoughtful about their actions, more aware of the impression they're making. This brings us to one of the most sophisticated applications of silent power, the ability to control conversations without participating in them. When you're present but not speaking, you become a kind of silent moderator. People start unconsciously directing their comments toward you, seeking your approval or reaction. They begin to perform for your benefit, even though you haven't asked them to. You can guide the direction of discussions through subtle non-verbal cues. A slight frown can discourage certain topics. A small nod can encourage others to continue. A shift in your attention can redirect the entire flow of conversation. You become the conductor of an orchestra you never joined. The power dynamics in any group will naturally organize around the person who seems most in control of themselves. When you demonstrate that you don't need to speak to be heard, that you don't need to perform to be noticed, that you don't need validation to feel secure, others begin to orbit around your stability. But here's where many people make a critical error. They think silent power means never speaking at all. This is not silence, this is absence, and absence is not power. True silent power is about strategic communication. You speak when your words will create the outcome you want. You remain silent when silence serves your purposes better. When you do choose to break your silence, it should be devastating in its precision. Every word should be carefully chosen. Every sentence should serve a purpose. There should be no filler, no rambling, no unnecessary elaboration. You speak like a surgeon operates, with exact precision and minimal waste. This economy of language makes your words more memorable and impactful. People hang on every sentence because they know you don't waste them. They quote you later because what you said was worth remembering. They think about your comments long after the conversation ends because you gave them something substantial to consider. The master of silent power also understands the importance of strategic questions. Instead of making statements that reveal your position, you ask questions that force others to reveal theirs. A well-placed question can expose someone's ignorance, highlight their contradictions, or guide them toward the conclusion you want them to reach. Questions are particularly powerful because they shift the burden of proof onto the other person. Instead of having to defend your position, you make them defend theirs. Instead of having to provide evidence, you make them justify their claims. Instead of having to convince you, you make them convince themselves. The art lies in asking questions that seem innocent but are actually quite strategic. Questions that appear to seek information but actually provide it. Questions that sound supportive but are subtly challenging. Questions that make people think they're educating you when they're actually exposing themselves. This technique is especially effective in professional environments where direct confrontation might be inappropriate or counterproductive. You can dismantle someone's argument, expose their lack of preparation, or highlight their incompetence, all while appearing curious and engaged rather than aggressive or hostile. Now, let's address one of the most challenging aspects of developing silent power, dealing with people who try to force you to speak. Some people are threatened by silence and will do everything they can to make you break it. They'll ask direct questions, make provocative statements, or create awkward situations designed to pressure you into responding. This is where your discipline will be tested. The amateur will crack under this pressure and start babbling just to fill the silence. The professional will respond minimally and redirect the pressure back onto the other person. The master will use the pressure itself as information about the person applying it. When someone is working hard to make you speak, ask yourself why. What are they afraid your silence might mean? What are they trying to hide behind their chatter? What weakness are they trying to cover with their aggression? Their desperation to break your silence often reveals more about them than anything they could say about you. Remember, you always have the right to remain silent. You don't owe anyone your thoughts, your opinions, or your reactions. When someone demands that you speak, you can simply say, "I'm listening," or "I'm still thinking about that," or even just smile and nod. You maintain your power by refusing to be rushed into premature revelation. The truly sophisticated practitioner of silent power learns to use other people's need to fill silence as a form of psychological leverage. The more uncomfortable they become with quiet moments, the more they'll reveal in their attempts to eliminate them. They'll share information they didn't intend to share, make commitments they didn't plan to make, and expose vulnerabilities they meant to keep hidden. This is particularly useful in negotiations. While your counterpart is talking, trying to convince you, explaining their position, you're learning about their priorities, their constraints, their fears. Every word they speak in the silence you maintain is intelligence you can use to your advantage. But silent power extends beyond individual interactions. It's also about how you present yourself to the world more broadly. In an age of social media oversharing and constant self-promotion, strategic silence becomes even more powerful. While others are broadcasting every thought and feeling, you maintain an air of mystery. You don't feel compelled to respond to every comment, to share every opinion, to participate in every debate. You choose your public communications as carefully as you choose your private ones. This scarcity makes people more interested in what you might say rather than tired of what you're always saying. Your online presence, if you choose to have one, should reflect the same principles as your offline behavior: quality over quantity, substance over frequency, impact over volume. When you do share something, it should be worth sharing. When you do comment, it should add value. When you do engage, it should be because you've decided the situation deserves your attention. This approach naturally builds a different kind of following. Instead of collecting casual observers who scroll past your content without thinking, you attract people who pay attention to what you say because you don't say it often. Your rare communications become events rather than noise. The same principle applies to your professional reputation. Instead of trying to be visible in every meeting, involved in every project, and vocal about every issue, you become known for your strategic contributions. You speak up when you have something valuable to add. You get involved when your skills are genuinely needed. You take positions when the stakes are high enough to warrant your engagement. This selective participation makes your involvement more meaningful and your contributions more impactful. People learn that when you're engaged, it's because something important is happening. Your presence becomes a signal that others should pay attention. Here's something crucial to understand about the long-term development of silent power. It's not a technique you can master overnight. It's a fundamental shift in how you relate to the world around you. It requires you to become comfortable with being misunderstood, comfortable with being underestimated, comfortable with being mysterious. Most people have been conditioned since childhood to explain themselves, to justify their actions, to make sure everyone understands their intentions. This conditioning runs deeper than you might realize. It starts in elementary school when teachers demand explanations for every behavior. It continues through adolescence when peer approval becomes currency, requiring constant verbal negotiation of your social position. It solidifies in adulthood through workplace cultures that reward those who speak up in meetings, romantic relationships that demand emotional transparency, and social circles that interpret silence as disengagement or rudeness. This societal programming creates what I call explanation addiction, a compulsive need to fill every silence, clarify every misunderstanding, and defend every choice. You've been taught that silence equals guilt, that not responding equals agreement, and that failing to justify yourself equals weakness. These are lies that keep you trapped in patterns of overcommunication that drain your energy and diminish your power. Breaking this conditioning takes time and practice, and it requires you to fundamentally rewire decades of behavioral programming. You'll have moments where you want to defend yourself, where every fiber of your being screams that you need to set the record straight. You'll feel the familiar urge to correct misunderstandings, especially when someone's interpretation of your actions or motives is completely wrong. You'll want to make sure people know how smart or capable or well-intentioned you are, because the alternative, letting them think less of you, feels unbearable. These moments are tests. They're opportunities to practice a new way of being that goes against everything you've been taught. The discomfort you feel when you don't explain yourself is actually your old programming dying. It's the death throes of the people-pleasing, validation-seeking version of yourself that has kept you small and manageable for others' comfort. Resist these impulses with everything you have. Understand that every time you give in to the urge to explain, justify, or defend, you're reinforcing neural pathways that keep you weak. Every time you resist, you're building new pathways that lead to authentic power. Remember that your reputation should be built on results, not explanations. People don't remember what you said about what you were going to do. They remember what you actually did. Your worth should be demonstrated through actions, not arguments. The most compelling case you can make for yourself is a life well lived, goals achieved, and promises kept. Your power should be evident in outcomes, not in rhetoric. Think about the most powerful people you know or have observed. They don't spend their time explaining their decisions to everyone who questions them. They don't feel compelled to justify their choices to people who weren't involved in making them. They don't argue their worth, they demonstrate it. This isn't arrogance, it's efficiency. They understand that energy spent on explanations is energy not spent on execution. The people who matter will recognize your value without you having to advertise it. These individuals have the wisdom and emotional intelligence to observe patterns, to notice consistency, to appreciate competence without needing it spelled out for them. They understand that still waters run deep, that the most profound people often say the least, and that true confidence doesn't need to announce itself. The people who don't recognize your value probably don't matter as much as you think they do. This is a hard truth that challenges another piece of conditioning, the belief that everyone's opinion of you matters equally. It doesn't. Most people are so caught up in their own dramas, insecurities, and agendas that their assessment of you says more about them than it does about you. Their inability to recognize your worth without constant explanation is actually valuable information about whether they deserve access to your time and energy. And the people who are threatened by your silence are usually threatened by your strength, which means you're doing something right. Your silence forces them to confront their own need to constantly perform and explain. It highlights their insecurity by contrast. Their discomfort with your self-containment reveals their own lack of self-containment. When someone is bothered by your refusal to engage in unnecessary explanation, they're really bothered by what that refusal represents, a level of self-assurance and independence they haven't achieved. As you develop this skill, you'll notice that your relationships begin to change in profound and sometimes uncomfortable ways. Some people will be put off by your new approach, and their reaction might be stronger than you expect. They were comfortable with the old version of you, the one who filled silences with nervous chatter, took on emotional labor without being asked, and always had something to say to smooth over tension or make others feel better. They benefited from your overfunctioning and your need to explain yourself, because it made you predictable, manageable, and useful to them in ways that served their needs rather than yours. When you stop providing this service, they experience it as a loss. They might accuse you of being cold, distant, or changed. They might try to provoke you back into your old patterns by creating situations that historically would have triggered your explanation reflex. They might interpret your new boundaries as rejection or your silence as hostility. This discomfort is not your problem to solve. Their inability to adapt to your growth is information about the nature of your relationship with them, not a call for you to shrink back to your former size. Other people will be intrigued by your transformation, and these reactions will surprise you with their positivity. They'll be drawn to your newfound confidence and self-containment like moths to a flame. There's something magnetic about a person who doesn't need to explain themselves, who can sit comfortably in silence, who responds thoughtfully rather than reactively. They'll respect your boundaries because boundaries create respect. They'll value your selective engagement because scarcity creates value. When you speak less, your words carry more weight. When you explain less, your actions carry more meaning. These are the relationships worth investing in. These people see your evolution as inspiring rather than threatening. They understand that your growth doesn't diminish them. It challenges them to grow as well. They appreciate the space your silence creates for deeper connection and more meaningful exchange. You'll also find that your own internal experience becomes calmer and more focused in ways you didn't expect. When you're not constantly generating words to fill every silence, your mind has space to actually think. Instead of using your mental energy to craft explanations, justifications, and defenses, you can use it for observation, analysis, and strategic planning. Your thoughts become clearer because they're not competing with the constant noise of unnecessary communication. When you're not taking responsibility for everyone else's comfort, you can focus on your own objectives. You realize how much energy you were spending trying to manage other people's emotions, reactions, and perceptions. That energy becomes available for your own goals, your own development, your own peace of mind. You discover that you're not actually responsible for how others feel about your choices, and this realization is incredibly liberating. When you're not performing for others' approval, you can concentrate on your own development. You stop living your life as if it's a presentation that needs to be constantly explained and defended to an audience. Instead, you live it as an experience to be fully engaged with and learned from. Your focus shifts from external validation to internal satisfaction, from impression management to authentic expression. This internal shift is perhaps the most valuable aspect of developing silent power, and it's the part that most people don't anticipate. It's not just about how others perceive you, though that certainly changes in remarkable ways. It's about how you perceive yourself. You begin to see yourself as someone whose thoughts are valuable enough to be shared selectively, whose time is precious enough to be guarded carefully, whose attention is meaningful enough to be given strategically. This shift in self-perception is revolutionary. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who needs to constantly prove their worth, you begin to see yourself as someone whose worth is inherent and doesn't require external validation. Instead of viewing your silence as emptiness that needs to be filled, you begin to view it as fullness that doesn't need to be emptied. Instead of experiencing your lack of explanation as a deficit, you begin to experience it as a strength. The journey toward mastering silent power is ultimately a journey toward mastering yourself. And like all forms of mastery, it's not a destination but a continuous practice. It requires discipline, the discipline to resist impulses that have been reinforced for decades. It requires patience with yourself as you unlearn old patterns, and patience with others as they adjust to your new way of being. And it requires a willingness to be comfortable with discomfort, because growth always involves leaving the familiar territory of who you were to explore the unknown territory of who you're becoming. But the rewards extend far beyond any individual interaction or relationship. They compound over time, creating a completely different life. Experience, you become someone who cannot be easily manipulated because you don't need constant validation. Manipulators rely on people's need for approval, explanation, and understanding. When you don't need these things, their tactics become ineffective. You become immune to guilt trips, emotional manipulation, and social pressure because you're not dependent on others' opinions for your sense of self-worth. You become someone who cannot be easily pressured because you're comfortable with tension. Most people cave to pressure because they can't tolerate the discomfort of conflict, disagreement, or disapproval. Your comfort with silence extends to comfort with tension. You can sit in uncomfortable situations without feeling compelled to resolve them immediately through explanation or capitulation. This makes you incredibly powerful in negotiations, conflicts, and any situation where patience and composure provide advantage. You become someone who cannot be easily dismissed because your rare words carry weight. When someone speaks constantly, their words lose value through oversupply. When someone speaks selectively, each word is considered and meaningful. People begin to listen more carefully when you do speak because they know you don't waste words. Your opinions become more influential because they're not diluted by constant commentary. This is the true nature of Machiavellian power in the modern world, and it's important to understand what this really means. It's not about cruelty or deception, despite what popular culture might suggest. True Machiavellian power is about strategic thinking and emotional discipline. It's about understanding human nature and social dynamics well enough to navigate them effectively. It's about recognizing that in a world full of noise, silence is the ultimate luxury. In a world full of performers, observers hold the real power. The person who speaks the most in a room is rarely the most powerful person in that room. The most powerful person is usually the one who speaks the least but whose words, when they come, shift the entire conversation. They're the one people look to for approval, whose opinion carries the most weight, whose silence creates more impact than others' speeches. When you master silent power, you don't need to announce your arrival. People feel it in the shift of energy when you enter a room. You don't need to demand respect. People give it automatically because your presence commands it. You don't need to prove your worth. People assume it because your confidence is evident without being stated. You become the kind of person others want to understand, want to impress, want to be around, all without saying a word. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it's not always comfortable. There will be times when your silence is misinterpreted, when your refusal to explain is seen as arrogance, when your new boundaries are tested. But these challenges are part of the process. They're how you practice and strengthen your new way of being. Remember this truth as you begin to implement these principles in your daily life. The world is full of people who talk about what they're going to do, who make grand announcements about their intentions, who seek credit for their plans before they've executed them. It's full of people who explain why they did what they did, who justify their choices to anyone who will listen, who need others to understand and approve of their decisions. But it's desperately short of people who simply do what needs to be done and let their actions speak for themselves. Be that person. Master the art of silent power not as a manipulation tactic, but as a way of being that honors your energy, respects your time, and acknowledges your worth. Learn to control any situation without speaking by understanding that control comes not from dominating the conversation, but from mastering yourself. And watch as the world begins to revolve around the gravitational pull of your quiet confidence. The strong don't need to roar, their presence is enough to command attention and respect. The powerful don't need to explain, their results speak volumes louder than any words could. The wise don't need to argue, their silence wins every debate because it forces others to confront the strength of their own positions without the distraction of verbal combat. This is your invitation to join the ranks of those who understand that true power whispers, that real confidence doesn't need to explain itself, and that the most profound transformations happen not through what you say, but through who you become when you finally stop saying so much. Master silent power, and you master the game itself.